Alright everyone, we are revisiting Hollywood once again, this time in the eyes of the gaming world. Just recently there was a video game released called The Bourne Conspiracy, based on the very popular Bourne Identity movies starring Matt Damon. I don't know why I'm plugging that, but anyway, it segues nicely into what we're going to be doing here. We're going to create the logo for the new video game. It's called The Bourne Conspiracy, where obviously we're going to take, license and change it up a little bit, but just want to give it an idea. It's a very cool kind of high-tech look where it's got a grid and a target and everything like that. And I thought we'd adventure into that by recreating it here. Now, we're going to start with the grid background. It's a very simple grid. It's kind of a solid box grid. So what we're going to do in here first is, first off, the document. I'm working on a document that has a black background. If you want to see the image size I'm working with, this is a 10 by 7 at 125. Just be wary of your image size if you're working in print or video. You will need to take that into consideration. But again, I'm working on a black background, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer. And let's take our rectangular marquee tool, as you can see right here. I'm just going to hold the shift key down and draw a very small box, roughly the size of the grid box that I want it to be. Not very big. In fact, we're going to zoom in here so we can see what's going on. So there's my box, and I held down the shift key again just to constrain the proportions as I drew the box out. And I'm just going to, I'm going to go ahead and set my default colors here. I'm going to press the letter D on my keyboard, and I'll get the black and white foreground and background. But I want to fill it with white, so white is the background. I'm going to press Command-Delete, Control-Backspace on a Windows machine, and it fills that square in. Now, before I deselect, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to go under the Edit menu and go to Stroke. And we're going to give this a good size, well, not too big of a stroke. Let's go with a 2 pixel, and make sure that it's on the inside and everything else is normal. Let's click OK. So there you can see it's inset that white area a little bit. That's really what we've done here. But the selection is still outside the white area. So keeping it still selected, let's go under the Edit menu and choose Define Pattern. So it gives me that little grid swatch there. So that pattern is defined. It is now saved inside of Photoshop. So I no longer need this layer. So let's go ahead and take that and throw it away. And let's go ahead and create a new blank layer to fill this pattern in. I'm going to press Shift-Delete. And inside the contents, we're going to use Pattern. And we just simply click the menu and choose the pattern, which was defined as this one right here. And we'll click OK, and it fills our image into there. Now, I don't want the entire grid to fill this entire image, so we're going to mask it out a little bit. So I'm going to go hit the layer mask, and let's go and grab our gradient tool, using the foreground of the transparent, and of course using black as our color so we can mask out the area. I'm going to hold down the shift key and just come in with the gradient tool from all 4 sides. Now, of course, making sure we're using the linear gradient tool right up here in the options bar. But again, I'm going to come in from the top, mask it in from the sides, and let's come in from the bottom. Let's bring in that side there a little bit more, just so it's kind of faintly in there. So there is our grid. So we'll come back to modify this a little bit more, but we're going to move on to the next element, which is a circular target. It's kind of a high-tech targeting site. And we're going to do that in a new document. And the reason is we want to do it in a perfectly square document based on how we're going to create it. And you'll see in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and make this a 5 by 5 inch at 150 because I want it to be pretty high res based on how we're going to distort some objects here. So we'll click OK. And we get our square document there. Again, I want to be on a black background, so I'm going to press Command or Control I, and that will simply invert the white to black. Now, what I want to do now is create the lines that make up the outer rim of my grid. So we're going to start at the very bottom here, and the reason, based on how we're going to design this, we're going to ultimately use the polar coordinates filter to generate the rounded effect, but we're going to create the elements in a 2-dimensional flat surface. It'll all make sense in just a moment. Let's start with by grabbing our rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to go here to the bottom of the document and just draw a long, narrow, or very thin line, basically, along the bottom of the document. Now, again, notice I'm not working on a blank layer, a new layer. You certainly can if you'd like to, but in this case, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and work. You know what? I've always made it a habit of working on a new layer. Let's go ahead and do that. So with that selection active, I'm going to press Command-Delete, Control-Backspace to fill it with the background swatch, which is white. And again, with the same rectangular marquee, I'm going to draw another box just above that one, perhaps a little bit thicker. And I'm going to use my arrow keys to nudge it down a little bit. And again, fill that one with white. And let's perhaps make one more, maybe even a thinner one, right above that. and we'll fill that. So it gives me a little bit of a line there. Now, I'm going to zoom in for this next part I'm going to do. We're going to create the vertical lines that, or the horizontal line. I'm getting confused on myself. The vertical lines that make up the part of the grid. Now, I understand this isn't looking like much yet, but kind of go with it and know that it's going to make sense in just a moment. So what we've got so far is these 3 lines at the bottom. We're zooming in, and we're going to take that marquee tool and we're going to draw a very thin line right here. And again, we're just going to fill it with white. Now let's take that same line, it's 1 pixel. Actually, we're going to do this. Keeping that shape selected, press Option Command T, and that will set it up for a step and repeat we're going to do. You can see the transform boxes. I'm going to use the arrow keys, the right arrow key, and just nudge this over just a little bit so there's a little bit of a space between those two. Then I'm going to press enter. Now, keeping it still selected, if you press Shift Option Command and then the T, it'll step and repeat that shape several times. So I'm only going to do a few, and then we're going to go and deselect. Now, I don't want all these lines to be the same height, so what I'm going to do here is actually take my marquee tool and just select a handful of these just like this, and then hit delete. So now I've got those lines spaced in there a little bit, looking pretty good. Now, what I want to do is take my rectangular marquee and draw a selection from the very top to the very bottom of this document that it contains this area, these horizontal lines and these vertical lines. Now, I'll offset it a little bit here, giving a little space, but that'll make sense in just a moment. Now, I'm not including any of this other area because we only need to define this area as the pattern that we're going to use. So with that area selected, let's go under Edit, Define Pattern, and then deselect. Now, let's go ahead and create a new blank layer. On top of all these other layers, we're going to press Shift Delete. And using the pattern, just like we did before, we're going to look for that newest pattern, that one right there, click OK, and now that's going to fill all the way across the bottom of the document, especially with those little lines. Now it's true, earlier I probably didn't have to draw the full extent of these lines. Probably could have just drawn this small part, but it really doesn't matter. It's not really an extra step. It's just superfluous lines we probably don't need. But at any rate, we've defined the pattern, filled the layer in. Now, on this layer, we're going to go into the filter menu and use Distort Polar Coordinates. Make sure that you've got it set to rectangular to polar, and when I hit OK, watch what happens. Boom. We've got really cool looking target set. Now we can apply it to our image. Now, it did include the black background here, so we want to just bring the white shape over here. So if you remember how to load the luminosity of an image, here in this case, it's going to be all the white areas against the black. Since it's straight black and white, it should select the entire area. So we're going to load that luminosity as a selection by going into the channels and Command or Control clicking directly on this RGB channel. Just like that. So let's take that selection and drag and drop it. Move your selection tool over the selection until it turns into the little selection move tool, and we'll just drag and drop it into our working document right over here. And again, we'll use the move tool to kind of push it in place. Let's make sure that we're over here in the layers, create a new blank layer, and I'm going to press Command Delete to fill that with white. So now we've got our grid, we've got our target in place. Let's scale it down a little bit. Again, I'm proportionally scaling it by holding the Shift key and the Option key. That would be Shift Alt on a Windows, and that will scale it proportionally to the center of the shape. So let's plop that right about there. And now we're going to change up, we're going to add a couple of things to this target actually. And probably for the first time ever, we're actually going to use the single row marquee tools. How about that? Let's grab this first one, the single row, the horizontal tool, and we're going to click and look for the center of our target right about there. We can go ahead and create a new blank layer, and let's press Command Delete, Control Backspace to fill that line with white. Let's go back in here and grab the single column, plop it right there in the center, Command Delete, target's filled. Now let's finish this off by adding a color on this. I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment solid color layer, and let's give it some kind of bluish green color. It's kind of how it was on the video game. And then let's simply change the blend mode to perhaps overlay. And there, it gives us a really cool effect there. Now I want to do one more thing to this target layer, to this object right here. Let's go ahead and select that, grab or apply a layer mask to it. And we're going to grab that gradient tool just like we did before, using black to transparent. This time using the circular gradient tool, the second one right here. And we're just going to mask out this side of it just a little bit. And that's going to make way for the text we're going to apply. Now, for the sake of time, I've gone ahead and laid out the text. And if I go ahead and turn that on here, there we have the nice, cool logo. Let's get that in place. For the Bourne games.